This is a video about the first few questions that I've asked you about the Nicholas Carr article, Is Google Making Us Stupid? I've asked you to answer several questions, but this video just covers the first few. By now, you've had a chance to read the entire thing. If you read it through the link that I posted, you might have found yourself falling into some of the same pitfalls that Carr mentions in his own essay. So maybe you started tripping from link to link and you went down a rabbit hole. Maybe you saw ads popping up on the side of the page. Even if you were reading it in the PDF version that I gave you, maybe you noticed that you kind of zoned out or you started thinking about something else, or maybe you even turned to your phone and started scrolling through social media. So I think the fact that a lot of us have trouble concentrating on this entire article might be evidence that he would use to prove his point. If you read it all in one go and you were able to read deeply and annotate, I'm impressed with that. So, a couple things before we begin. This article is kind of dated now. It was published in 2008, and it caused quite a stir when it came out. There have been several articles responding to this one. Lots of people who disagree with Nicholas Carr and say that he doesn't provide enough evidence for his argument. So this article caused quite a stir. It's also been published in all sorts of textbooks and anthologies. It's a pretty famous article. As we're reading it, I would like to think about how we can incorporate some of our own examples or counter arguments or anecdotes that would kind of bring this into 2023. So you might think about things like AI. You might think about how social media has evolved since he's written the article. You might think of the pandemic and the rise of online learning. There's a lot of things that we could add to this article that we could incorporate if we were going to be responding to this article in some way. Your first test is going to cover this article, and there's going to be a writing component. So I think this video will help you begin to generate some of your own responses to the article and answer the first couple of questions about it. So I want to start with the first question I asked you, which is about the hook and what the point of the hook was. And again, this is just to kind of give you some ideas, and then hopefully you'll respond in the discussion on Canvas. So in the hook, he's referencing a very famous movie. If you've taken a history of film class, or if you're a film buff, you've probably seen it or maybe seen clips of it, 2001: A Space Odyssey. In fact, if you've seen the most recent Barbie, or not the most recent, but if you've seen Barbie, there is sort of an allusion to 2001: A Space Odyssey in the beginning when the little girls are throwing their old school dolls, their baby dolls, on the ground and kind of banging their heads on the ground. So the movie is famous enough that there are allusions to it and all sorts of references to it. So this is a reference that I think Carr assumes many of us will understand. If you're not familiar with the reference, on the previous page I have a video clip of the scene in question. And basically in the machine, in the scene, the astronaut seems very cold and calculating as he's disconnecting Hal, the supercomputer. Now, he's doing that for a reason. Hal has tried to kill him, but still the astronaut seems very cold. And he seems as if he's not being very empathetic to this machine who is basically dying. So I think he's using that to pull us in, to give us some sort of cultural touchstone moment there that he then refers to at the end of the essay. So I'm asking you what you think of the hook, whether or not it's effective, and how it's relevant to his overall argument. I also want to talk about what his central claim is, what his thesis is. Now, this is not an academic essay, even though it's studied in many different academic classes. The essay itself is not academic. So you're not necessarily going to find the thesis at the end of the intro paragraph. And the thesis is not necessarily going to be one complete, beautifully written sentence. If I had to boil it down to a couple of sentences that seem to be really the main idea of his argument, I might pick something like this. I can feel it too. Over the past few years, I've had an uncomfortable sense that someone or something has been tinkering with my brain, remapping the neural circuitry, reprogramming my memory. My mind isn't going so far as I can tell, but it's changing. I'm not thinking the way I used to think. And obviously that force that's changing the way that he's thinking, at least according to Carr, is the internet. There's also a sentence a little bit farther down that I think speaks to his central argument as well. But basically, it's that the internet is changing not what he thinks, but how he thinks in this really fundamental way. A little bit later, he has a great metaphor. So what I like about this essay is there's plenty to discuss, but there's also a lot of examples that we can emulate in our own essays. I like how he's using figurative language. I like how his voice, how his point of view, and how his personality comes across in this essay. So you can use metaphors in academic essays as well, or in non-academic essays. A little bit farther down here in pink, we have, even when I'm not working, I'm as likely as not to be foraging in the web's info thickets, reading and writing emails, scanning headlines and blog posts, watching videos and listening to podcasts, or just tripping from link to link. So what I love about that is that the language here is so rich. Foraging. Think about foraging where you go out into the wilderness and you forage for mushrooms or for berries. Think about how that might relate to being on the internet and searching for something. Whether it's a great quotation or the answer to a question, how it is sort of as if we're foraging for that berry. And then info thicket is an interesting term there too. A thicket is a really dense wooded area, kind of a tangle of branches. So he's comparing the internet to a thicket, but an info thicket, and the process of finding whatever it is that he needs as foraging. I think that's a really great metaphor there. And then a little bit farther down, he talks about how links don't just point you to related works, they propel you toward them. And if you think about it, that's really true. When you click on a link, you are actually sent to the website or to whatever it is. Unlike if you're reading a text that's published in a book, you're not actually sent to the website, right? You might be sent to the works cited page, but you're not actually sent to the website. A little bit farther down, we have another metaphor that's pretty famous at this point. What the net seems to be doing is chipping away my capacity for concentration and contemplation. My mind now expects to take in information the way the net distributes it, in a swiftly moving stream of particles. We could even say that that's kind of like a thesis too, that's another way of packaging his central claim. Here's the part that I think is really beautifully written. Once I was a scuba diver in a sea of words. Now I zip along the surface like a guy on a jet ski. It's kind of funny, but if we unpack it a little bit, we might want to think about the difference between scuba diving, right, where you explore something more deeply, where there's lots of training involved. To be able to scuba dive, you actually have to take some classes and pass a test. How you go down under the surface of the ocean to look at things that you wouldn't normally see, maybe get a new perspective, see cool coral reefs or fish that you wouldn't have noticed before. And it's a much more kind of slow process. Whereas if you're on a jet ski, that's much more kind of recreational and fast and exciting, but you're obviously not seeing what's underneath the surface. So think about why that metaphor, at least in my view, is so apt here. What do you think of it?